Welcome to May 2nd Planning Commission meeting. Tonight on the agenda is a brief summary of the latest as far as some of our undertakings, and then we're going to be discussing the report that Robert Gibbs prepared for the village of Southampton regarding retail expansion and impact of shopping supermarket on the village and the village's business district, the heart of the village. Just a brief summary. This last month, I have the pleasure to announce that after about 4 or 5 years of work, originally actually going even further back, about 7 years, where Stan Ekstad of Aaron Kranz and Ekstad was brought into the village to do a master plan study of the village, which basically established a vision. Following that, they got involved into the second phase of it, which was implementation. The first step was coming up with design guidelines, architectural design guidelines. They did an extensive study on that, basing it on the historic village, basically studying the main street of the village, and deriving from that guidelines that were projected onto other portions of the village business district for future expansion and development of the village in those areas. And these are mostly areas that were developed post-war. I'm referring to Windmill Lane and Nugent Street primarily, where the characteristics of the buildings and architecture on these two streets are not in line with the Main and Job's Lane historic portion of the village. Those guidelines were drafted up about 2 years ago. They went through back and forth both with the trustees, the various community organizations, getting input from them. We had numerous meetings in the village hall discussing various aspects of it, modified some of those recommendations. Chick Voorhees, the village planner, prepared the environmental impact assessment on this. And finally this month, the trustees voted unanimously, I must say, on adopting these zoning changes. I've been asked, okay, when are we going to see the results? My answer usually is that don't hold your breath on that one, that these are all long-term plans that we're basically putting the seed in for the next anywhere between now and 50 years, 60 years, hopefully we will see some of those results. The good news is that with the economy being as such and development being slow, that gave us a breathing room to look into these issues without the pressure of development basically muddying the waters in that sense. And we came up with some very clear guidelines which I think ultimately will help the village. And just briefly, since this has been adopted and it's going to go into the zoning books, and we're not going to hear about it anymore until the project comes up, I'm going to just highlight some of these changes that were introduced in the zoning. As far as overall lot coverage allowances, nothing has changed on that. They still stay the same. We never were intending to change development allowances. The issue was how those developments within those same allowances can be reconfigured, and that's what we've achieved here. One of the main revisions was to the use category of the zoning, which was basically introducing residential use in the village business district. I'd say about 70, 80 years ago, we had about 120 or so certificate of occupancies for residences in the upper floors of the village. Today that has been reduced to about 20 or so. We're hoping that through this change in time, upper levels of retail could be accommodating residences. Of course, again, this is strongly attached to what the health department would allow as far as treatment, sewer treatments, and that is not, again, something that has been implemented yet. It's something that we're going to be looking into as to how to provide a treatment facility for the village business district, and once that is in place, then the introduction of residences on the upper floors will be a possibility. And the impetus behind introduction of treatment facilities is, among other things, primarily is to protect our aquifer, the water that we use out here drinking, and the concentration of so many treatment septic systems in this area does affect that. One of the signs of it is Lake Agawam, which again we are looking into different possibilities of how to reverse the pollution of Lake Agawam, and we'll shed light on that in the upcoming next meetings. Actually, we have consultants that are going to present to us some of their findings on the lake and what they're suggesting as far as solutions. So going back to the table of use regulations, the introduction of residential use is primary among that. And then the next is also introduction of hotel, motel as a special exception, not as of right. And by the way, both of the residential and hotel uses are special exceptions, which basically what it translates down to is that this is not as of right development where one put an application and get a permit for it, but they would have to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals and make a case for it. In the case of hotels, there is actually being proposed by the trustees to be adopted this month a new, how should I term it, a new variant on that, where a process on that, where the special exception would not go in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals for approval, but it would actually go in front of the trustees first, and then to the Zoning Board and the Planning Board, where the trustees would have a say on each individual application based on their understanding of the village and how they feel about having something of that nature incorporated in the village. Then when it comes to dimensional regulations, there were various nuances introduced into the zoning. Primarily was shifting of the buildings to the edge of the street, to the sidewalk, so there would be no front yards, elimination of the front yard, and elimination of private curb cuts to rear yards, where usually they're used for parkings, for private parkings. This private parking is again eliminated and incorporated as a public parking, consolidated with the central parking in the village. So private and public grounds would be consolidated into one large parking that could be used by the public, and reduction of curb cuts to these areas. Various other guidelines for architectural guidelines regarding height were introduced, and setbacks were introduced so that we wouldn't get one homogeneous 3-story, 3.5-story wall all along, or 2.5-story wall all along either one of the streets, that as the buildings go up, they would have to set back, they would have to have variations in height, so there would be a breakdown in scale on the upper levels. There are modifications to the parking requirements, and I think that's basically the more complete elements of it. Again, these are all posted on the village's website, and everybody can monitor and read more about it on that as far as recommendations and zoning changes to the village master plan. Any questions on that? Again, thank you all for your efforts. I think we did plenty. And both the mayor and trustees were very thankful of the Planning Commission for their undertakings in that. A while ago, the trustees introduced local law amending the Chapter 116, which is the zoning chapter of the Village Code, to introduce a special permit use for a supermarket in the HP district, which is a highway business district. The village has very little area that falls into the highway business district. It's primarily I'd say the southern side of the County Road 39 between the North Sea Road and Hampton Road. There are about, I think, number of parcels that fall into the village over there. There were requirements as to how or what kind of a supermarket could be allocated in there. There were requirements as to the minimum size of the lot, which I can tell you what that was actually. Let me see. The lot areas would have to be less than, no less than 60,000 square feet, which basically brings it down to about 7 lots in the village. And again, this was not to be as of right granting, but again, a special exception that the special permit use that any applicant would have to come in front of the trustees, and the trustees would have to approve that in order for it to go in front of any of the other boards, there would be that the zoning board or the planning board. And the reason for that is that, again, this is not something that all those 7 lots could be developed into supermarkets as of right, but that once one supermarket was developed, then the trustees could say no to any additional based on needs of the village. The village has been basically, I don't want to use any other word, but I can say the word threatened by a proposal for a supermarket, quite a large one, about 60,000 square feet, plus another additional 20, I think, totaling about 80,000 square feet, called the Tuckahoe Center or Tuckahoe Market. Just to give you an idea of scale, I'll give you a square footage of all the other markets that are in the Southampton village area. The main supermarket is the Walbaum, that's around 29,000 square feet. We have Schmidt's market.
We're talking, I'm sorry, this is building size?
Building size.
Not parking?
Building
just
size,
building.
just the building, not the parking. The building is Walbaum at 29,000. Schmidt's is at 6,000. The Rite Aid pharmacy, which used to be a grocery store, is at 13,000. But presently we have only these two, the Walbaum and the Schmidt's in the village of Southampton, at 29,000 and 6,000. There is a proposal for a fresh market at the intersection of Hampton Road and County Road 39, which falls into the scope of this new law being proposed, and that is proposed at 17,000 square feet, which basically makes it about less than 10,000 smaller than Walbaum's, and about triple the size of Schmidt's market. It's a specialty market for fresh foods. It's not a fully stocked supermarket in that sense, mostly groceries and food items, such as Whole Foods type store. The report, I don't know if you guys had a chance to review it. I'm going to just touch on certain aspects of this report, and then we'll open it up for discussion as to where we are. Oh, by the way, before I get into that, I just want to shed some more light on this Tuckahoe Center. The Tuckahoe Center is proposed on County Road 39 and McGee Street intersection in that area. It's about 80,000 square feet, which is relatively large, much larger. It's, we're talking about 3 times the size of, less than 3 times the size of Walbaum in the village. Or twice the Walbaum plus additional stores over there. And the location of it would be such that not only would it interfere with the traffic on County Road 39, but also the village residential zones north of Hill Street could be threatened with access and traffic to use it as a back road point to access this, this new market, proposed market. The village made a number of points as to how it would affect the village's both retail activity in the heart of the village and the traffic negatively, and this was presented to the town of Southampton. At the present, the trustees are awaiting hearings on that in the town to make further decisions on how to go forward with what's being proposed in the village, specifically the law that they've proposed for allowing supermarkets in the HP district. And in the meanwhile, as I said, they asked Robert Gibbs, which is a retail consultant, which last year the Southampton Association introduced Mr. Gibbs to the Planning Commission to look at the existing retail activity in the village, make a projection as to how that could grow, how it could be improved, and these reports basically address some of those findings that he undertook. I will quote some key elements on the Gibbs Planning Group's grocery impact study. It says research has established that there is a proven correlation between the presence of a grocery store anchor and lower vacancy rates for inline retailers, with higher rents for neighboring retailers and higher and less volatile property values. This is one of the key points that they've tried to drive in their report, that by introducing a supermarket in the heart of the village as an anchor, it would help retail health in general and improve basically the livability of the village business district by bringing more people to this anchor, and by that various other stores will be benefiting. In the general impact section of this report, they say that for the purposes of this study, they shall assume that the area's existing supermarkets are located in the outside of the village center and are a 10,000 square foot green grocer and a 15,000 square foot store with a traditional selection of products. These numbers actually, by the way, are not accurate. Walbaum's is not 15,000, it's 29,000. And the 10,000 square foot, which I assume they're referring to Schmitz is actually less than that. It's about 6,000 square feet. And they also are assuming in this study that a new 20,000 square foot store is to be an upscale grocer will be presented into the heart of the village with price points and selections similar to Whole Foods or similar stores. For this discussion, assume further that the new 20,000 square foot store opens as planned as a walkable urban store and within 300 feet of the village's center's shopping district. I assume by, again, a village center's shopping district, they're referring to the village business district. Right. In passing these zoning changes that we've been working on for the 5-6 years past, one of the things that we looked at basically was availability of sites for these types of developments. That are there larger sites available in the village to accommodate a supermarket? And it's not only the building itself, but also associated with that are parking requirements for a supermarket, whether the village can accommodate parking for that kind of a facility in the heart of the village business district. The larger sites in the village are on Windmill Lane and Nugent. And even those, when I'm talking about large, relatively speaking, are pretty small sites. Right. They're large in comparison to the sites on Main Street and Job's Lane. But if you were to compare them to sites that usually are traditionally developed as supermarkets, these are minuscule. We're talking about, again, close to an acre or less than an acre per site. And there are maybe 4 or 5 of these lots available. I can actually count them. One is the corner of Windmill and Nugent. The other one is the site where the Rite Aid is sitting on. And then there's 2 other sites which are occupied by drive-through banks. One is on Windmill Lane, the other one is on Nugent. Of course, there's also the old post office site, but even that is, as far as size, quite small. I should have gotten square footage of the post office, 6,000-7,000 square foot, which is comparable to what Schmidt's market is basically, with maybe even just as much, if not less, parking available to it. But very soon we came to the conclusion and that a supermarket with parking requirements would not be something that could be easily accommodated or could be actually accommodated based on our zoning or even based on the proposed zoning in the heart of the village. If anything, we wanted to get away from the box type architecture of Rite Aids and CVS's to more smaller scale Main Street and Jobs Link type architecture, even though if it was to be a larger building, but to have a breakup architecturally of the exterior to reflect the smaller scale village. And very early on, I think we realized that to accommodate the supermarket in the heart of the village would not be desirable or a possibility. And hence, looking at the possibility of another development of supermarket in village brought the highway business district, which again has larger sites. It's not in the heart of the village business, but quite close, less than a mile away from the end of Hampton Road, where it meets County Road 39, to the village business district is just below a mile. I wouldn't say it's walking distance, but it's a very easy drive. And it's a road that it's quite a wide road with not much traffic on it. And to that extent, and also the other advantage of this site that was designated for use as a market, or proposed for use as a market by the trustees and the property owners mutually, was not sitting actually on County Road 39, but kitty corner from it. So it wouldn't impede on the flow of traffic over there, going back and forth towards further eastern towns, that being Bridgehampton or East Hampton and so on. The trustees presently have taken a position that they do not want, they want to put this law regarding the highway business supermarket on hold pending some resolution of the town's position on the Tuckahoe Center. Even though the village opposes that project, but they're waiting to see what comes out of that. Again, I want to make it clear that as far as the Planning Commission is concerned, and as far as the village's stance vis-a-vis that market, we've opposed it for a number of different reasons, which we can get into that today too as well. But with this, also one other caveat is that even if a few sites in the heart of the village business, which is the historic village, were to be consolidated to accommodate a supermarket, then there's the issue of parking. The proposed site at the end of Hampton Road for a market, fresh market of 17,000 square feet is proposing 84 or 88 parking spaces. The village sites cannot accommodate market at 17,000 square foot plus exterior parking spaces close to 90 cars, not to mention loading docks for trucks and so forth, which is again another cumbersome requirement. So with this background, I'd like to open up the meeting and have some discussion as to what, first of all, we think about this new law presented for the Highway Business District supermarket, the ramifications of a new market in the heart of the village business district, the ramifications of it on the new zoning laws that were just passed, and also the position of the village in relationship to this new law that's being proposed, and the law and the approvals that the town is considering for the Tuckahoe Center, and what ramifications that would have for the village, both from traffic and from a retail activity point of view.
It's a mouthful.
It sure is a mouthful, but we'll start from some corner and we'll take it to.
One comment I would make is the difference between what is being proposed with King Kong on the highway and the rest of the things we're talking about. So that's a big box supermarket. which part of the issue, I think, for us is it's not only about food. So they have a large pharmacy department, they have many other things. And so it becomes a all-encompassing place for someone to go and shop. And so its impact tends to be much greater, both in terms of other retailers than a market does. So I think there's a significant difference between King Cullen of that size and the sort of markets we're talking about in terms of the impact they have on other retailers. So for example, if you put in a market that only sells food, then someone can open up a drugstore next door, or a card store, or many other type of stores. The problem with King Cullen is you basically, people go there for multiple reasons. So, no one's talking about it, but you open King Cullen, it has impact on CVS and Rite Aid and everyone else, not just on the markets. That's one thing. It really, I think it's a very different type of retailer than what has been proposed either on our highway site or in the village itself.
And they won't benefit the village businesses.
Right.
So
So the first thing I would say, on the other hand, in the village, historically, we had several markets. So, there was a time there was Bohack and IGA and Wallbounds all operating within a few blocks of each other. And I think that is a really good model, which is, competitive markets can work well. You shouldn't have just one. I think it's bad for the village to have just one, in terms of its ability to be a comprehensive place to shop. And you're talking, as you pointed out, the high side of that range is the existing Wallbounds, which is 30,000, but we're really talking mostly about 5,000 to 20,000 square foot markets, which I think are completely different.
10,000 to 20,000.
10,000 to 20. Well, I'm thinking of Schmidt's being 6,000. So if you took that as the low side
Yes.
and said 20,000 as the high side, that's obviously a very different range than a 60,000 square foot store.
Which is the taco center.
Right, so it's really different. And I think people get confused because they say, well, why are you opposed to King Cullen if you're not opposed to the other? It's a completely different store.
The problem is that they're both referred to as a supermarket.
Correct, and that's not really
confuses the
accurate.
term.
That's
Yes.
really accurate. So that's the first thing I would say. The second is, I think in the village center, we can accommodate a market in that range because I actually believe that people will park and shop differently. And so I think if you look at East Hampton, for example, or Bridgehampton, both of those Cinderellas have fairly modest amount of parking. I think it'd be hard to find a merchant in either of those villages who said that's been an issue. Because people do many things, which is really what a village business district is about. They do more than one shopping trip. So they go to Cinderella, they go to the drugstore, they do a lot of different things. So I personally am not worried about our ability to accommodate a specialty grocer in the village. I don't perceive that as precluding a specialty grocer on Flying Point Road. I think the two are quite complementary. We have a village that actually has a bigger population than it did when we had those three markets before. So it's hard for me to believe we can support three markets now, or four. So
Actually, the Gibbs report has corroborated.
right.
That basically the additional supermarkets will not, in the heart of the village, will not affect the other markets negatively.
Right.
If anything, there would be a cause for the outer stretches of the town of Southampton to come to the
Right,
village. And they would actually benefit from that. Even the other stores would
Right,
benefit
right.
from that by having this consolidated, not consolidated, but by proximity of various markets in the heart of the village.
So I guess my feeling is that what's being proposed on County Road 39 in the Tuckahoe Center really is a very different character, and will have, I think, a fairly significant impact on retail in the village in a very different way than the markets we're talking about. And I think Mr. Gibbs talks about the positive impacts of a market in the village, which I agree with. I don't believe that precludes the type of market we were talking about on Flying Point Road. And I think, honestly, if someone had proposed a 15,000 square foot grocery at Tuckahoe, we probably would be having a different conversation
Absolutely.
than the conversation we're having. That's not what's been proposed.
That's right.
So,
Also, I want to make a point here too regarding what you mentioned that in the village business district, once one parks, in addition to the grocery, they would attend or visit other stores
Right,
too.
right.
That was the premise in our parking study,
Right.
why we reduced the parking requirements.
Right.
The parking requirements as they were originally in the zoning book were never followed by either the planning board or the ZBA. And they were either grandfathered uses that, and with that grandfathered reduced parking spaces that they, in new developments, plugged into that grandfathered number. And based on that premise, we looked at more realistically how we can approach the issue of parking. And based on national parking studies, we came up to the conclusion, or the national planning studies came to the conclusion that if one consolidates the parkings for all sorts of retail, then you can reduce the number of parking, because by parking in one shop, one area, you will visit a number of different retail activities. And that's the logic behind reduction of the parking requirements in the heart of the village.
The other thing I would say is, and again, this is very, very parallel to what happened in East Hampton. If you put a grocery at the site that's being proposed, clearly that's gonna create a
Which
lot
site
of.
are you referring to, the Hampton Road?
The Hampton Road site. That's clearly gonna create a lot of activity in that parking lot, which means that people like me, who now use that parking lot to do shopping actually on this side of Main Street, will have much more incentive to use this large parking lot, to the west of Main Street, which actually gets a fairly low level of use right now. So it's gonna move demand. It's not, I don't believe that someone will not come here because their favorite parking lot doesn't have spots. I think they'll move to another lot. The issue now is you can go to that lot and basically find a spot. You need to be a little more patient, but you can find a spot.
So that was another point that
Right.
was made by our consultant, that parking is not, additional parking is not needed in the village, but more, better signage and accessibility to existing parkings. Again, examples are the parking lot behind the movie theater,
Right.
which majority of the time is practically vacant. And also the other consolidated parkings in the village have to be better identified. And as you said, based on these new uses coming to the village, people will have better incentive to familiarize themselves with these other options.
Just thinking out loud, what might be the opinion or the thought of if this Hampton Road property was anything other than a grocery market? What could it be other than that? I mean, it could be, it's a commercial zone property, right?
Well, it's a commercial zone. Under present-day zoning, it's a low-impact retail activity. Examples of it are car dealerships.
So
Hardware stores, pool companies, stuff like
That's
that right there.
those are all
That's right.
low impact.
Those are all
Right.
low-impact stores. Now, again, another point to be made about that location is that that's a gateway to our village.
Highly visible, right.
Highly visible, and a gateway that is not really defined architecturally as a gateway. Across the street from it, we have mini mall type development, which definitely is not sympathetic to the village architecture. And that corner Flying Point and Hampton Road would, through some sort of a development, basically define some sort of a landmark gateway to the village, which I think has a positive impact as far as enhancing the village at its entrance.
Is this meant to be new construction or just adapting what's there?
New construction.
New construction.
New construction.
Because it's putting it in a different space than it currently in the current building, right?
That's right.
Right, right.
It's shifting back,
Right.
I think, slightly, but it's one.
Still parking in the front?
Still parking in the front and the side.
Mm-hmm. Flying Point and Hampton Road.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure, actually.
This hasn't gone through a site plan review of any type, though,
No, it
so
has
this is not
not.
necessarily, I think, we haven't really, no one's really reviewed the plan and said, is this the best way to use the site? It's whether
No.
this use is the right use that
That's
people are
right.
talking about.
Being a grocery,
Right,
Grocery
right.
store,
Right.
Exactly.
Because
would it be a terrific idea if it was anything else other than a grocery? And it's like, oh, now that makes sense. What would come to mind? I'm just,
I mean, the problem is the traditional use in that little stretch has been car dealerships, which is what this was.
right,
You know, nothing against car dealerships, but as a use for the
threshold.
gateway to the village, it's not the
Well,
best.
one
use.
thing that comes to mind,
Right.
which is the obvious, is a restaurant
Right.
at that location.
Right.
Right.
And that's
Right.
definitely an option
Right.
Right.
as far as having a
Right.
restaurant in that location. Whether a restaurant would be more of a community benefit versus a grocery store, which I know that
It seems like the debate and the argument is, how is this taking business away from somebody else? And if that wasn't part of the equation, how good of an idea is it that this become redeveloped? I think it's a good idea if this becomes
well, even the
redeveloped.
Gibbs report corroborates that by in the heart of the village, even if you were to go less than a mile away from the heart of the business village, historic village, and develop something of this scale, that would not negatively impact
Existing businesses?
existing businesses. That if anything, it would generate more traffic from the outer lying 5-mile areas
Right.
around Southampton
Drawing.
to Southampton. And all those other stores would benefit from it. So this has been something that is corroborated in this report.
So if
and
you're in
backed up.
Noyak, the question is, do you shop in the village or do you go elsewhere for food?
Right,
The more food there is in the village, the theory is, I think, Gibbs' theory was, the more likely you are to come to the village itself. Even if you're at this site, you'll shop here, then you go to the village to shop, whereas if there's food options do not exist here, you may say, you know what, I'm just gonna go to Bridgehampton, or I'm gonna go elsewhere where I have the options.
Exactly.
So having 1 or 2 options in the village, I think, is fairly insufficient in
Mhm.
terms of being able to attract the amount of traffic, you know, Gibbs thinks is required to keep the retail sector sustainable long-term.
right, healthy.
Yeah.
And by the way, Gibbs refers to this numerous times, that this new, so-called new grocery store to be no more than 20,000 square feet.
Right.
Which is again smaller than the Walbomb that we have here. Whereas, as an example, the Tuckahoe Center,
Right.
we're talking about
Right.
70,000, close to
Right.
75,000 square
And
feet.
one more time, how large is this, the Hampton Road?
17,000.
17, so it's under that.
No, it's not. It's a relatively small
Right.
Right.
market.
Right.
So between a food establishment, a market, and I think to some extent, one thing that has muddied waters is the way everything has been referred to as a supermarket.
Right, right,
And that word of a super,
right.
basically, we have a Bridgehampton Commons that
Right.
Has a supermarket.
Should call it a specialty market.
Special, I think it's more like a specialty
Right.
market.
It's like saying Macy's and J. Crew are both clothing stores.
That's right.
That's
Right.
true on the face of it, but
Right.
obviously completely different.
Jewelry and mattresses.
Right, and they sell a million other things, and I think
Yeah.
that's one of the key things
Household.
about the Cape Cullen. It is not just food. A significant amount of their business is not food, and that's really critical in terms of why it has such
Household.
impact. Sorry?
Household,
Household
Pharmacy.
items, pharmacy.
film.
So in theory, you don't need to do as much other cross-shopping as you would do when you're just shopping in a specialty market, whether it's Schmidt's or Wilbaum's or, you know, Cinderella or a Fresh Market, you're just gonna shop there and somewhere else.
Well, and it's evident what it's done to Main Street in Bridgehampton. is
Correct.
They've become all antique shops.
Right, right,
Well, to that extent, that
Right.
was one of the main criticisms of the village to the town regarding this proposal of Tuckahoe Center, that because of its scale and the type of activities going beyond
Right.
just the market, that it's a destination on its own. You wouldn't even have to go to the village for a cup of coffee anymore.
right.
You do your shopping there, you go to the pharmacy, you go to the bank, you have your
Right.
meal,
Mm.
and then you're off back to home without even visiting the village. Whereas in the case of a Fresh Market at 17,000, you can have certain elements of your shopping there, other elements of it at Walbom or some of the other
Right.
stores. There's the pharmacy in the village, there's cafes
Sure,
in the
sure.
village, and so
Right,
on.
right.
So-
I mean, just further up County Road, it seems like there are all these medical offices
Yeah.
have opened up. This could easily have become that,
Right,
Yes.
you know, not hurting anybody.
right, right.
Not, Schmitz wouldn't lie awake awake at night,
Right.
wall
Well,
bounce would
again,
stay big.
this criticism that Schmitz, I've heard a number of times regarding hurting his business, I don't think that's a valid criticism, primarily because this village at one point did have 3-4 grocery stores operating at the same time, and one of the main criticisms of Waldbaum's is that if they were to have some more competition, they would also improve their services to the village.
Because that'll make way for somebody else.
Or make way for
Well,
somebody else.
but, you know, it is a fairly basic rule of retail, that the greater concentration you have retailers in one place, the better everyone does.
Mhm.
And I
Sure.
really do believe that. I think the problem is, and it's why it's interesting enough why the town has basically not allowed big box stores, which is what's so interesting about Tuckahoe. The town has generally forbidden big box stores to come in because of the fear that it does have exactly that impact where you create a non-competitive environment. So somehow they've overlooked that at Tuckahoe, but it really, that's what it is in that industry.
Mhm.
It's no different than opening, you know, Costco or something like that, which are great stores, terrific stores, but, you know, they have a real impact on other merchants. So.
Which is the effect of the highway big box retails on Riverhead.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
Riverhead, Sunrise Highway, and what's done to Patchogue and the other villages, when you open those big box stores, they are very competitive. And so, especially with King Cullen, is you're opening a big box supermarket. It's really, that's what struck me reading his study and then thinking about what they're doing in Tuckahoe, the significant difference. And I think when we said we couldn't fit a supermarket in the village, we were really talking about a King Cullen type,
Yes.
larger format supermarket.
Absolutely.
Right.
Mhm. Actually, there is a proposal for a smaller Citarella market in the village,
Right.
and that again is part of the
Right. Fits in our zoning.
fits the zoning,
Right.
and the scale of it
Right.
is a small market,
Right.
not really infringing or imposing on the other markets possibility. Actually, Gibbs' report suggests that in the growth of the village, it can up until 2017, it can increase retail by about 109,000 square feet. It can accept,
Wow.
which is quite a large number. Of that, about 30,000 of it is grocery stores, food and restaurants 26,000, gifts 17,000, healthcare 10,000, and then the rest are 7,000 smaller numbers. Home furnishing, hardware, electronic appliances, sporting goods, and so on, adding up to about 110,000 additional square foot, projected for 2017.
So what's the timetable on this?
Well, the thing is
Property.
that on this property, on the Hampton
Hampton
Road, it's the trustees presently have put it on hold, the discussion on this. There was an environmental impact study made by Chick Voorhees, he's the planning consultant to the village, where he found that there is no negative impact from a 17,000 square foot market at the end of Hampton Road. Obviously, there has to be some addressing of traffic in that intersection as to how to improve it, which has to come. But presently, the trustees have put it on hold, and I think that this is something that they should put it back on their agenda and discuss it more vigorously, and not wait for the town to define the path for the village, but that the village look after its own interests in that sense. I have asked the mayor, and the mayor has accepted and commissioned an attorney to represent the village for the village's interests vis-a-vis the Tuckahoe Center. And at least we have representations over there, but I think that we should also actively address our own personal needs that are more tailored to our environment rather than impose on our environment.
Right.
I would like to open it also if anybody has any questions. Peter, any comments, questions?
I'm enjoying listening.
Very well. What I would suggest us to do is to provide a brief response based on this Gibbs report and what was originally proposed for the Highway Business District zoning change to the trustees. That concludes based on these findings, based on the scales, and I think again addressing this issue of scale, that you cannot compare apples and oranges,
Right,
that
right.
supermarket versus specialty market is
Right.
two different things. To make some clarifications and some build-up of our cases based on these reports, and go back to the trustees with that in the next month and present it to them, so that, again, I would hate for the village to sit passively waiting for the town to define its path, and if there are any modifications to be made to this local law regarding the highway supermarket, to make those modifications, or at least identify what are the issues more precisely, and address it rather than put it on hold.
And CMAC, I assume, our role as planning commission is not to comment on the particular site plan?
No, we will
It's
not
really
be.
to comment on the use.
It would be primarily on the use
Right.
and on the effect of it on the bird's eye view on the village,
Right.
addressing, definitely addressing concerns such as the Pakahu Center
Right.
vis-a-vis this proposal, which basically are going to affect the village even though it sits in the outside boundaries of the village. But not a site-specific
Right.
review,
Right.
more of a use.
What has been the main criticism against this particular project, if any?
The criticisms have fallen into, one was not in my backyard. Some of the neighbors might have some concerns, immediate neighbors in that sense. And then some local merchants had opposed it on the premise that it will affect their retail activities.
So
such as
residents
foods.
are opposing it because of the location, and merchants are opposing it because of the use.
Because of the
Right.
competition.
And residents proposing it because of location, a lot of those comments are about traffic.
Right.
That's right,
Right.
traffic, the issue of traffic. And I
Could
think
there
that,
be any more traffic? I mean, it's a drop. This is the busiest place in Suffolk County.
Right.
I don't think it's,
I think that definitely the traffic has to be addressed in the context of County Road 39 and how that would be affected. But one beauty, I think, again, of this site, and again, I don't want to focus too much on this specific site, but this site is not actually sitting on County Road
Right.
39.
Right, you can get in and out without going to
it
39.
kisses the corner,
The traffic basically
bypasses this.
bypasses it
That's
in
right.
that sense. So to that extent, a village resident would not have to even get on County Road 39 to access this market.
Yeah.
And from County Road 39 accessing this market, it would not be an imposition on the village.
It would be very difficult to get in here from County Road 39. That's a very, you go through the light onto Fly Point.
Depending on which direction. If you're heading from east to west, yes, I would say that would be difficult.
You just, you cross
You
onto Fly
cross,
Point and
onto
then
Fly-
come in this back.
That's right.
Right.
So I think that there does need to be an issue of traffic discussed, not discussed, but elaborated study as how to resolve or mitigate the traffic in that intersection.
But that's a general problem, but it seems to me that this probably will not exacerbate the problem.
On the surface, yes, I would agree with you.
Very
And I
different
think
than a site actually on 39.
on 39,
Right.
which are 6 other sites that would be eligible as a highway
Right,
business.
right, right.
And if that were to be the case, they would
Right.
exacerbate traffic both on County Road 39 and for non-residents and for residents of the village to access that site. It would be a
Right.
difficult
If this was
position.
patio.com, it would be a big, different
Absolutely.
animal.
It would be a
A
completely different
yeah,
story.
yeah, with the
Yes.
merge lane
That's right,
and all
right,
that,
right,
yeah.
right.
And to oppose it on use, I think, is a new question. I mean, then you can't, then any grocery store in the village would be opposed. That makes no
It's
sense.
not just this particular site, it's if it was 2 lots over, they would
Same
still.
story.
yeah,
Right, that makes no
That's
sense.
That's what I'm saying, if it was
Can't
anything
oppose
else,
it.
would there still be this,
Yeah, you
should
can't
we,
oppose
shouldn't
the
we?
use.
Well, I don't think
If
the
it was a shoe
village,
shine store, come on.
the village and the planning commission should not be commenting on one store versus another. First of all, ultimately, you can't control that.
Right.
You know,
You should.
people can rent what they want to rent.
Yes.
That's not really zoning, that's something else. The question is that type of use a good use on the site, not whether or not, you know, because, so we talked.
I'm always not even thinking about that. I think
Right.
it aesthetics
Right.
is the threshold to
I
the
agree,
village.
I agree.
It's been sad to look
Right,
at that
right,
yeah,
0.09% interest rate sign for
Right.
the last 3
Right.
years.
It's
Yeah.
correct,
It's sad.
right.
At the gateway to the village.
Yeah.
Anything would be
To
great.
There's
remember that
nothing
interest
that
rates
cheap in this
were,
county.
to remember that interest
With
rates were once that high, right?
You're right.
1.9.
0.09.
Right.
Now it's plywooded.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, vacant buildings are not good for anyone.
No.
They're not good.
I mean, I know we're not supposed to comment, but it'd be nice if the parking was in the back.
Right.
I'd like to also present another issue here that has been brought to my attention, and that's the zoning uses on highway business along North Sea Road. That many property owners are very much restricted based on what they can accommodate as far as use on their properties, and that has affected number of properties on that. I'm talking about the corridor where Lynch's and the post office and Schmidt's Market is. There's a number of sites there, and one of them is 200 North Sea Road, which is right now that historic brick building. It's again, that building is boarded up, and
It's actually being worked on.
they're cleaning it up. I don't know what they're doing, but I know that there are concerns as to limited options as far as use, and whether those could be expanded upon beyond just office to some sort of a retailer in those
Is it limited
markets.
to office?
Yes, it's limited to office. Retail cannot open there.
I mean, offices, I don't think it's gonna have a big draw.
No, well, it's very limited again, as I said, and to the option of retail would definitely improve the health of that corridor. But again, that has to be looked at. I know there's some other uses that are being introduced in that corridor. One of them is the African American Museum of the East End, which is north of the train tracks being introduced in that area. And this corridor definitely has to be looked at.
I think you need
in
to
that context.
carefully, we would need to carefully look at it, because that corridor already has multiple traffic conflicts.
Yes.
I mean, you know, people are in and out, and it's used as a through route.
That's right.
So, I think, you know, if we wanted to consider that, we want to study to make sure it could be done in a way that doesn't
Exactly. I mean, I know there's plenty
exacerbate.
of complaints regarding post office access.
Right.
So that
Right.
has to be all looked at.
Right.
Very interesting. So I will work with you guys on
Yeah,
this memo to the trustees regarding the Gibbs report, and incorporate the highway business supermarket law as part of that. Maybe we can change it from supermarket law to more appropriately
Yeah.
named market for
I
sure.
actually think terms are important. I think one of the things we
Absolutely.
could do in this memo is clarify terms,
Mhm.
which is a big box format store
Yes.
versus a market. And I think, if you say big box format store, I think the issue of Tupelo becomes much clearer, which is the town has actually passed a law saying it didn't want big box stores.
That's right. Whereas now they're going behind their own law,
Right.
trying
Right.
to approve of this proposal. Very well. Any other comments from anybody? Okay, well, thank you all, and we will follow through. Good night.